Welcome to our beautiful Church of the Sacred Heart of Mary here on Wolf Island for the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord Jesus. The Feast of the Presentation falls on February 2nd, 40 days after Christmas, December 25th, and I'm here with our nativity scene. Normally, I have to say, by this time we've taken it down, but this year I've encouraged you at home and here in the church for us to keep the nativity scene up for the full 40 days. Historically, that used to be the Christmas season, 40 days from the Christmas to the presentation. Now, today, formally, it ends on the baptism of the Lord. So the last time I saw you a few weeks ago was the formal end of the Christmas season liturgically, but we can keep that custom as we have this year of the nativity scene of our Christmas season coming straight through to February 2nd. In this year where we've been separated from each other and isolated at home, being spiritually united around the nativity scene makes sense. Now, in fact, when the baptism of the Lord took place 30 years after the events of Bethlehem, we had to sort of skip ahead. Now, on the presentation, we've sort of come back in time because Jesus was taken by his parents, Mary and Joseph, up to the temple in Jerusalem. Bethlehem and Jerusalem are only a few miles apart, so Bethlehem is really a part of Jerusalem. You might call it, in a sense, a part of the Jerusalem area, or that David's city is close to David's capital, Bethlehem, close to Jerusalem. We're told that the baby Jesus was brought to the temple, as was the custom, 40 days after his birth, and there Simeon and Anna, aged prophets, as it were, recognized him as the Messiah. Most people didn't. And so it goes before and after the presentation. But the moment of coming to the temple was important. Why? Because the temple was the heart of the covenant that the Jewish people had with God. It was where the presence of God dwelt in a particular way. They called it the Holy of Holies. It was the place where only on special occasions the high priest could go. It was where sacrifice was offered. All around the promised land, the Jewish people would gather for prayers and reading the Torah in their synagogues, but only in the temple could proper sacrifice be offered. Many years after the presentation, it would be near the temple where Jesus himself was in fact tried, where he began his walk along the Via Dolorosa, that he himself was sacrificed on the cross at the time where the Passover lambs were sacrificed in the temple. The temple is the heart of the Jewish people, and the heart of Jesus' ministry, from an infant to a child to an adult, takes place against the backdrop and, in fact, even in the precincts of the temple. The temple is the place of God's dwelling. And now, on the Feast of the Presentation, God himself visits his temple. Here before the nativity scene, we rejoice in this familiar way of saying God is with us. But we know that God, in fact, is with us all the time in the church, whether the nativity scene is up or not. The presence of the Lord Jesus in our churches, our temples, is greater than that even in the Temple of Jerusalem. There where the presence of God dwelt, here we have the real presence in the Holy Eucharist. You've heard it said before that Bethlehem means house of bread, interpreted from the earliest days of the church as a reference to the fact that Jesus would be our bread. Jesus would be the bread of life. Jesus was born in a Eucharistic town. Well, the temple is the presence of God, and Jesus comes to that temple. During these past weeks where we haven't been able to gather in our church, we have missed that presence, the presence of God in the church, the real presence of God in the most blessed sacrament. And so the presentation, as we conclude this Christmas season, reminds us to be grateful to God for the gift of the Incarnation in history and the continuation of that gift in our churches, in our tabernacles, to the mystery of the Most Holy Eucharist. Jesus visits his temple as a child. Jesus dwells in our churches in this sacramental but real way. And so as we conclude these reflections by the nativity scene in our church, as we formally end the Christmas season, we ask that we have lively sentiments of gratitude for the presence of God in the world, for the presence of God in the church and in our families, and for the real presence of the Lord Jesus in our churches. We desire, and we've learned recently, have we not, how important it is to gather in His presence. The Lord visits the temple, and we ask that He visits our hearts and our families, and that we might visit Him in the Most Holy Eucharist. I thank you for joining me here at the Nativity scene in Sacred Heart of Mary Church for these last few weeks of the Christmas season, and I wish you and your family every blessing of the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.